Okay, as I was doing my research about the history of feminism and I learned about the different waves, and it talks about they use waves as a concept to explain feminism, because kind of like how each move, like the first wave, the second wave, the third wave, they kind of moved into each other, and how, because what was going on in the first wave influenced the second wave, right? So like that generation influenced the next generation, which created, this new movement of feminism, but it also did it with the third generation, and how with the third generation, it started trying to include all these different perspectives. So it's kind of like this wave. It's not really a cycle, but almost kind of like, to me, how waves always continue. And what I found in this new wave was that because of the internet and social media, they created this new movement of how women could stand up for issues, and the rights of women changed the way that feminism was talked about, the way that the issues were talked about, the way that the connections were talked about. There was this new technology. It created these specific incidents that the research was talking about, how kind of created the start of this new fourth wave. And it talks about there was actually specific moments within the 21st century that were talked about online and through social media that started to change feminism and started to change the movement of feminism and the way things were talked about. The first incident, and I actually remember reading a news story about this, was there was a young girl who was raped in India, and she was raped by multiple men. And because of this rape, she actually died. And the articles that were written by her, they now, because of the internet, we now get the news not just through our TVs or through our newspapers. We get the news on the internet. We have, different news stories, different news companies, but it also, and because of social media, people started sharing this story, and it created this outlash, like a backlash for what happened that would have before this time been a local issue, and only the people who were locally in India would have had to deal with it. But because of internet and because of the social media, it started bringing out this issue so that the world can see it, and so the world could see, what these young girls in these countries are going through, or when they're being raped, or when they're being sex trafficked, or they're dying from this, and or the people who do it are not getting punished, and it's making something that's talked about all over the world. And so people all over the world are standing up for these young girls, and it's no longer just a local issue. The next defining incident was actually, the research showed it was 2 years later in 2014, and they actually called it Gamergate. And it talks about how there's this website called 4chan, and I guess people can create forums on there to discuss things, but that this group of men that actually call them like a men's right activist group, they say they fight for men's right, decided that they wanted to create this forum where they were discussing ethics in video games and the way it's reported on, and news stories and things like that. But yet when other women or even other men who may not agree with them, if they discussed that on the forum, those women actually were starting to be threatened online. And they weren't just threatened like, oh, these men told them mean things, or, they called them bad names. Like, they were actually sending them death threats, like saying, I'm going to find out where you live, I'm going to use the internet to find out where you live, and I'm going to kill you. But not only that, they were going into details about how they wanted to rape these women. And so it brought up this concept of, do people who do this, or in this case, do men who do this, hide behind the anonymity or the privacy of the internet to say things they may not say to a woman in public? And what could that cause be? If they're willing to say that on a keyboard to a woman in public, go into details about how they're going to rape them and then kill them and say, I'm going to find your address, what makes you think they won't do that in public? And it also brought up this concept of this article that I read where this woman author discussed how when she shares her articles on Twitter, she'll get private direct messages from men who don't agree with her. And it's not just like, oh, I don't agree with you because of this. They will actually threaten her and they'll make death threats against her, or they'll threaten to rape her and then kill her. And one of the threats that she got, when she went to his profile to try to block him, she noticed that he was married and he had kids and he was sharing all these pictures of his family and even of his mom. And she thought, would he say this in public? Would he say this in front of his wife? Would he say this in front of his mother? Or does he think that just because he sent it privately over the internet that he's not going to have to face the consequences of saying that? And so she blocked him, but she also wanted to share what he wrote to kind of warn people to what she was going through. And it just led to more death threats and more rape threats. And some people did support her. But the interesting thing that stood out to me was that she got comments from women saying, you shouldn't have done that, you're going to get him in trouble. And so she talks about how would she be the one getting him in trouble when he's the one who wrote it? He sent it to her. Yes, it was a private direct message, but if he took the time out to actually write out how he was going to rape her and how he was going to kill her, he chose to do that, he sent it, then the one getting in trouble is himself, not her. That we as adults still have to think about the consequences of what we write online. Which leads to that in the research I found that the election of Trump, they feel, was another defining moment, because while there's some women who do support Trump and they feel like, oh, he said those things in the past, but he didn't mean them. And, look at, he hires women to work for him. There were other women who felt like, because of the way he talked about women in the past, that because of how he's acted, because of certain things that he said in his election, they felt like, did he really truly support women? And how it kind of tied into the creation of the Women's March and still fighting for these issues. And what I found interesting about the Women's March was, as I was reading the research about it, it actually shows that the Women's March, I thought it was created by a young person or maybe a young woman. And it was actually created by a grandmother. A grandmother on Facebook got this idea, and she shared it on Facebook, and she started talking about it with other women, and that's how they created the Women's March. And then that's what gave me this idea for this survey of sending it out to women of all ages and all colors and all different perspectives, because I thought about, okay, like this grandmother, like what influenced her? Was she a part of other women's movements and rights? She been to other marches? Like, how, did feminism influence her in a negative or a positive way? And it made me think of how we all influence each other and how it's okay that all of us have different perspectives on this, as long as we're trying to work together and actually create a better life, than not just for women, but also for men, because women and men are tied together. Okay, and so for this question, I want to ask you, like, what do you feel about the fourth wave of feminism, and how do you feel, it affects the way feminism is viewed currently? And what do you think about what I said in this video?